Welcome to High Scary Stories. Tonight we head deep into the forgotten places, where the pines whisper, the shadows move, and not everything that watches you is alive. 8 terrifying true-style tales await each, darker than the last. From a girl in the trees who never left to lights in the valley that no one else can see, to a battlefield haunted by more than memory, these stories are not just meant to scare. They're meant to stay. This is High Scary Stories. Let's begin. Story 1, The Screamer in the Pines. I grew up in a place where the trees screamed. Not howling wind through the branches, not owls or foxes or anything you could name. These were real screams, long and sharp, something between a woman in pain and a wolf in mourning. And they didn't echo. They aimed. The first time I heard it, I was 12, standing on the back porch of our cabin in the pines with my dad's old flashlight and a plate of scraps for the animals. I didn't drop the plate. I couldn't. My hands froze in the air like my whole body forgot what movement was. Whatever made that sound wasn't far, and even worse, it wasn't finished. Because that night, it screamed again, closer. That was the winter everything in our little mountain town changed. After that, no one let their kids out alone. And eventually, even the adults started to disappear. Our family moved to Ashwood Pines the year my mom got laid off and decided city life wasn't worth the noise. Dad had inherited an old log cabin from his uncle, tucked at the edge of a dense pine forest in northern Oregon. And with nothing to tie us down in Portland, we packed what we had and drove into the woods. The town itself was small, less than 200 people on a good day, with a gas station, a diner, and a tiny school that barely scraped together 1 classroom per grade. People there minded their own business. They nodded, waved, but didn't ask questions. Our nearest neighbors were half a mile down the road, and the rest of the world felt hours away. I didn't hate it at first. I had a dog named Rusty, my own room for the first time, an endless forest to explore. Dad spent his days fixing up the cabin and trying to coax warmth out of the old wood stove, while Mom threw herself into baking and reading mystery novels by candlelight. It was quiet in a way that felt new, not empty. But the silence never really felt safe. Not in those woods. Not with how the trees leaned like they were always listening. And not with what started happening the 3rd week after we moved in. That was when the screaming began. It started with the animals. First, it was the squirrels gone. Then the birds. For 2 days straight, not a single chirp in the morning, not even the crows that usually lingered near the edge of the trash bins. Rusty, my dog, refused to go past the back porch. He would growl at the trees, low and steady hackles raised like something out there was watching us. At first, Dad thought it was a bear, maybe even a cougar. He started carrying his rifle when he went to chop wood eyes, scanning the treetops, like he expected something to fall out of them. But it wasn't just the forest. One night the wind blew hard enough to rattle the glass panes in my room, and I woke up to hear something tapping at the window. Not tapping exactly, scratching. Light, hesitant like claws dragging across the wood frame. When I looked outside, there was nothing but fog. And something else, silence. Not the peaceful kind, but a kind of forced quiet, like the whole forest was holding its breath. The next morning, I found 3 long gouges along the edge of the window frame. Too high for Rusty, too deep for a raccoon. Dad said it was probably a branch. But branches don't scream at night, not like what we were about to hear. The next few nights the sound came back. Not every night, but often enough that we stopped pretending it was wind. It always started the same way just after midnight, when the air turned still. and the temperature dropped like something cold had crept into the valley. Then the scream would come distant at first, long and rising like something was being pulled apart in the trees. The first few times it stayed deep in the woods. But then it moved closer. Dad stayed up one night with the porch light on, rifle across his lap, eyes fixed on the tree line. I sat beside him, pretending not to be scared, even though every time that sound rang out, my stomach twisted like it wanted to crawl out of me. Then came the night it circled us. We heard it start in the east, maybe 200 yards out. Then again from the north, closer. Then behind the cabin, far too close. Dad jumped up, lights swinging, and I swear I saw something move. Not fast, not human. Just the faintest shadow between the trees, like it ducked when the beam caught it. Rusty barked once, then whimpered and ran inside. The next morning, we found deer tracks circling the cabin. Only they weren't hooves. They were too long, too wide, and ended in claw marks. That was the first time I saw real fear in my father's eye. 2 nights later, it took Rusty. It had been snowing since dusk, a quiet, heavy kind of snow that blankets the woods and mutes every sound. Dad had gone into town for supplies. Mom was in the kitchen humming under her breath, and I let Rusty out just for a minute to pee, nothing more. I left the door cracked and stood by the window, watching him trot toward the edge of the pines, tail wagging, nose low to the snow. Then, without warning, he stopped. Every part of him stiffened like he'd turned to stone. I could just make out his shape in the porch light. He looked back once, ears flattened. Then he ran. Not back to the house, but straight into the trees. I threw the door open and yelled his name, but the forest had already swallowed him. Then I heard it. That scream. But this time it didn't start far away. It came from the treetops above me, not deep in the woods, right above me. I looked up and saw something drop, heavy, wet, a shape I can barely describe. Long limbs hunched, framed, something dragging behind it like a second body, or a tail made of bones. I slammed the door before it landed. The house shook. Mom screamed from the kitchen, and then it was gone. No prints in the snow, no sound, just the echo of my name whispered through the chimney. And that night, I knew for the first time it wasn't hunting animals anymore. It knew who I was. After that night, everything changed. We stopped going outside after dark. Dad boarded up the windows with scrap wood and hung old crosses above every doorframe, even though he hadn't been to church in 20 years. Mom started sleeping with the lights on, clutching a kitchen knife under her pillow. And me, I stopped talking. At school, the other kids whispered that I'd gone weird, that something had gotten into me. Maybe it had. Rusty never came back. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I still hear him barking, only it's not quite a bark. It's stretched and wrong, like something trying to mimic him, like it remembers him. One morning I found his collar on our porch, frozen solid, soaked in something dark. Dad said it was probably from an animal dragging it back, but he didn't look convinced. The screamer didn't stop. It just learned how to be quieter, smarter. Now it only comes on windless nights, when the moon is low and the trees don't move at all. And when it does, I don't scream. I just listen and wait and pray it doesn't say my name again. Some nights I wonder if it ever really left, or if it's just waiting, watching from the trees, learning new names. Maybe it doesn't hunt to feed. Maybe it hunts to remember. And maybe once it knows you, it never truly forgets. Not even after you've forgotten yourself. Story 2. The house that wasn't there. I saw a house that wasn't supposed to exist. It stood at the end of a dirt road, in the middle of a Wyoming prairie, miles from the nearest town, weathered and pale under a bruised sky. 6 windows stared back at me, like eyes half shut, and the front door hung slightly open as if expecting someone. I remember the smell of wet wood and something older like burnt paper. My brother said there was nothing there, that we had stopped by an empty stretch of road so I could take a piss, and there were no buildings in sight. But I saw it. I stared at it, and someone inside stared back. Later, when I checked the map, there was no structure ever recorded at that spot. No house, no foundations, just open land. But the worst part isn't that I saw a house that didn't exist. It's that weeks later, I started dreaming about its rooms. And they were never empty. It happened during a cross-country drive my brother and I took the summer before I started college. We had decided to drive from Portland to Chicago, the long way through Montana, Wyoming, and the Dakotas, just to see what open space really looked like. It was supposed to be our last adventure before I left home. My brother Ethan, 5 years older and already a truck mechanic, had always loved the road. He handled the driving. I handled the music and snacks. That day we had been on the road for nearly 7 hours when we took an unmarked gravel turnoff to stretch our legs. The sun was beginning to dip, spilling orange light across the hills. There were no towns for miles, no fences, no people. Just grassland and a few stubborn trees clinging to the horizon. As we stepped out of the car, the silence hit me first. Not the kind you get at night, but a pressured waiting kind. The air felt too still. I walked maybe 30 yards from the car, and that's when I saw it. The house. It stood alone in the distance, gray and warped, like it had been sun-bleached for decades. Ethan didn't see it. He swore there was nothing there. But I saw curtains shift behind one window, and I could feel something watching. I took a few slow steps toward the house, drawn by something I couldn't explain. The air around me felt thick, like walking through warm water. The grass under my feet was brittle, even though everything else looked green and alive. I turned to point it out to Ethan, but when I looked back at him, he was already in the car, waving me off like I was being dramatic. "There's nothing out there," he shouted. "Get back in." I turned back to the house, but it looked different, closer, like the distance between us had shrunk without me moving. One of the upstairs windows reflected the fading sun, but instead of bouncing light, it glowed a soft amber hue that felt alive. Then I saw movement inside. A figure. Just for a second. Not walking or waving, just standing in the hallway beyond the doorway. Perfectly still. I felt cold all at once, like something reached through me and pulled. It wasn't fear exactly. It was recognition. That sense you get when you see a stranger and feel like you've met before. I took one more step, and suddenly the house blinked out. Gone. Just prairie. Empty and quiet, like nothing had ever been there at all. I didn't say much to Ethan after that. I climbed back into the car, silent and shaking, and we drove another 2 hours until we reached a roadside motel just outside Casper. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the upstairs hallway of that house, long and shadowed with wallpaper, peeling in long strips. I heard creaking floorboards and the low hum of something moving just out of sight. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed I was inside. I was standing at the foot of the staircase looking up, but I couldn't move my legs. A woman stood at the top, her back to me. Her hair was soaking wet like she had just climbed out of a lake, and she whispered something I couldn't make out. I woke gasping for air. Over the next few days, the dream repeated. Each time, the house revealed a little more. A cracked mirror in the hallway, muddy boots on the kitchen floor, a locked door at the end of the corridor that pulsed faintly with red light. I stopped telling Ethan. He already thought I was imagining things. But the dream started following me into daylight. I'd glance at a building and see the shape of that roof. I'd hear the creak of those stairs, even when I was walking on pavement. Something had followed me. Something from that house. It all came to a head 2 weeks after the trip. I was back home packing for school, trying to forget the whole thing. But the dreams wouldn't stop. And worse, I started waking up with dirt on my feet. Not just dust, actual dirt, damp and grainy, like I'd walked barefoot through a field. One morning, my pillow smelled like old smoke. Another time, I found a dry pine needle stuck in my bed sheet. I hadn't been near trees in days. That's when I broke down and told my mom everything. She went pale the moment I mentioned the house. I thought she'd laugh or brush it off. But instead she left the room and came back with an old photo album I'd never seen. In it was a picture, faded and torn, of the very same house. Same windows, same sagging roof. My great-grandmother had grown up there, she said. It burned down in 1923. There had been a fire. No one survived, and no one ever rebuilt. I asked her where it had stood. She pulled out a map. Same county, same turnoff, same spot. I felt the blood drain from my body. Before she closed the album, I noticed something else in the photo. In one of the upstairs windows, barely visible, was the shape of a person watching. And their face looked a lot like mine. After that, I stopped sleeping in my room. I tried the couch, then the basement, but it didn't matter. The dreams followed. I no longer walked through the house in sleep. I woke up already there. I could feel the warped floor beneath my feet, smell the scorched wood and old water. The locked door at the end of the hallway was always there, pulsing, waiting. Once I reached for the knob, and something on the other side breathed in time with me. I haven't opened it. I'm not sure what would happen if I did. I've tried staying awake, but the dreams come anyway. In flashes, in seconds. Like a room that blinks into existence just long enough for me to feel it. Some nights I'll catch myself standing in the hallway of our house, facing a blank wall, hand outstretched like I'm about to knock. My mom doesn't ask questions anymore. She just leaves the hallway light on. And sometimes when I pass a mirror, I see the house behind me. But when I turn around, there's nothing there. Maybe the house never burned down. Maybe it just sank into a place we're not meant to see unless it wants us to. And maybe once it recognizes you, once it pulls you in, it doesn't let go. Not of your dreams, not of your blood, not ever. Story 3, The Smiling One. The thing I saw that winter still smiles at me in the dark. Not in dreams, not in memories, in real time, in real shadows. It started during a weekend trip to an old cabin deep in the Sierra Nevada mountains, the kind of place that creaks when you breathe too loud. I was 17. The snow had locked us in, and we thought we were alone. But something else was already there. I first saw it on the second night, standing at the tree line just beyond the porch light. Tall, too tall, thin but not fragile. And its mouth wide, stretched unnaturally from cheek to cheek, was already smiling before I even noticed its eyes. It didn't move. It didn't speak. It just watched. And the worst part was that I smiled back. Not because I wanted to, because I couldn't stop myself. Like something inside me had been waiting to see it. And it was finally home. The trip was supposed to be a last-minute getaway before school started again. My friend Jonah's uncle owned a half-rotted cabin tucked between two frozen lakes in the Sierra Nevadas, miles from any paved road. There were 5 of us that weekend, me, Jonah, his cousin Ray, and 2 of our classmates, Sarah and Lila. We brought food, beer, and 0 expectations. No signal, no town nearby. Just wind in the trees and the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. The cabin was old, maybe 100 years, with warped floorboards and windows that didn't quite shut all the way. But it had a wood stove, some old board games, and enough firewood to last 3 days. That first night, everything felt like a movie, laughter, snow falling outside, stories around the fire. I remember feeling safe, tucked away from the world. But by the second night, the mood shifted. Lila mentioned hearing someone walking around the cabin while we slept. Not footsteps exactly, more like dragging. Jonah laughed it off. Ray blamed squirrels, but when I went to get water from the shed out back, I saw prints in the snow, not boot tracks, not animal, bare feet, long, deep, leading from the trees to our front door, and not leading back. That night, I couldn't sleep. The others had passed out around midnight, a mix of whiskey and exhaustion. But I lay awake on the floor near the hearth, staring at the ceiling and listening. At first, it was just wind. Then, something different. A soft creaking like the wood just outside the front door was being slowly pressed down. Not a knock, not footsteps, just pressure, weight. I sat up and strained to hear, but the cabin had fallen into that heavy kind of silence, where every sound feels louder than it should. Then I heard it. A breath, not mine, not the slow rhythm of someone sleeping nearby. It was outside the window, just behind me. I turned, heart slamming, but saw nothing. Just frost gathering on the glass. I stood up and walked to the window, my breath fogging the pain, and for a split second I thought I saw something in the reflection. Not in the glass, but behind me. A shape standing near the fire, too tall for Jonah, too thin to be Ray. And it was smiling. I spun around, heart in my throat. Nothing. Just glowing coals and empty space. But the air smelled different. Damp. Like something had just left. Or was still very close. The next morning I didn't tell anyone. What could I even say? That I saw something in the firelight that wasn't there a second later, that something might have been breathing against the glass. Instead, I stayed quiet and kept my eyes on the woods. Jonah and Ray went out to chop more firewood. Sarah made coffee. Lila sat beside me and whispered, "You heard it too, didn't you?" I froze. She looked pale, her hands clenched tight around her mug. "I thought it was just in my head," she said. But last night I woke up and saw something in the corner of the cabin. It was smiling, but not with its mouth. With its whole face. She looked at me like she was hoping I'd say she was crazy. But I couldn't. I just nodded. That afternoon, Jonah found new prints behind the shed. Same shape. Long, wide, bare feet. But now they circled the cabin twice. That night, we pushed furniture against the doors and windows. Lila refused to sleep, and I stayed up with her. Around 3 a.m., the fire died low, and the room filled with shadows. Then behind the sofa, I heard it again. Breathing, slow, patient, like something waiting for us to notice. I stood and turned. Nothing. But the floor where I had stood felt wet. And in the frost on the window, there was a smear, like a smile traced by a single trembling finger. By the final night, none of us were pretending anymore. The prints had returned closer this time, right up against the back wall of the cabin. Sarah had started crying without explanation, saying she kept dreaming of a mouth opening wider than a face should allow. Ray wanted to leave, but the storm had buried the road under 2 feet of snow. We were stuck. Around midnight, the power from the old generator died. No lights, No heat, just the dim flicker of the fire and our flashlight's batteries fading. That was when we heard the knock. 3 slow taps on the back wall. Not the door, the wall, wood flexed. Something heavy leaned against it. I thought it would break through, but it didn't. It waited. Then came the voice, not loud, not angry, just cheerful. "Let me in. I'm already smiling." Everyone froze. I turned toward the voice, my flashlight trembling in my hand. There, just past the window, was a face, inches from the glass, too pale, too long, and that smile wide and twitching like it had been stitched open. Then it spoke again, but this time it used my voice. "Come outside. You left the door open." I screamed. Ray bolted for the back room. The rest of us huddled near the fire, too scared to move. When we finally found Ray an hour later, the door was open. He was gone. No footprints in the snow. Just a long, thin smile drawn into the ice on the inside of the window where his bed used to be. We left the cabin the next morning as soon as the snow let up. No one spoke during the drive back. Ray was just gone. Vanished. Lila wouldn't stop shaking. Sarah kept muttering a prayer under her breath, eyes locked on the rearview mirror, like she expected that smiling face to appear behind us at any second. Jonah never mentioned the trip again. He dropped us off, said nothing, and never answered my calls after that. I tried to tell myself it was trauma, that Ray had run off, that the cold had driven us into a shared hysteria. But then the dream started. Not just once or twice, every night, always the same. I'm back in the cabin, the fire dying, and something is behind me, just out of view. I never turn to face it, but I know it's smiling, and every now and then I wake up with the faintest trace of frost on my windowsill. Even in summer, and in the fogged glass, I always see it one perfect curved line, like a smile that never fades. Maybe it never needed to break in. Maybe all it had to do was be seen once, just once, to stay with you forever. And maybe the real horror isn't that it smiled at me, but that deep down, something in me smiled back. Story 4. Shadow follows the bloodline. There is something that follows my family. A shadow not quite human, not quite animal, but always watching. My mother saw it once when she was a child, crouched in the corner of their old barn, its eyes glowing faintly like embers in smoke. She never spoke of it again. I saw it too, years later, standing at the edge of our family's abandoned ranch in the Texas Panhandle, its shape barely outlined against the dusk sky, too still to be real. But it was real. I felt it all my life in mirrors that almost show more than reflections, and dreams that end with breath I did not take. No matter where I go, it finds me. It waits. I used to think it was a curse passed down by blood. Now I think it is something older, something we once invited in, and it never truly left. I grew up in a place people forgot. Dry land, cracked soil, and sky that stretched too wide above an empty stretch of the Texas Panhandle. Our ranch had been in the family for generations, passed down from my great-grandfather, who built it after coming home from the war. By the time I was born, the barn was falling in the house, leaned to one side, and most of the cattle were long gone. But we stayed. My mother said it was our land. Our name was in the dirt. My father left when I was 9. No note, no goodbye. Just one morning, gone his boots by the door, and the truck still in the driveway. After that, it was just me and my mom. She worked long hours at the diner in town. I spent my time wandering the fields and pretending the wind had voices. The only place I was never allowed to go was the root cellar behind the barn. It was sealed shut with a heavy wooden door, an old chain, rusted and tight. Mom said it had been that way since her childhood. But once when I asked about it, she went quiet. Real quiet. Then she looked out the window and whispered, "He used to come from there." Then she caught herself and told me never to mention it again. So I didn't. But I never stopped wondering who she meant. The first strange thing I remember happened when I was 11. I was playing near the edge of the fields, tossing rocks at fence posts, when I noticed something standing near the old windmill. It looked like a man, at first tall, narrow, wearing what seemed like a long coat that moved without wind. But there was something wrong with how it stood. Too still. Too straight. I blinked and it was gone. Just empty prairie again. I ran back to the house, heart pounding, and when I told my mom, she didn't say a word. She just pulled me close and made me promise not to go near the barn again. That night, I heard footsteps outside my window. Slow dragging steps that circled the house, once then stopped beneath my room. I was too afraid to look. I pulled the covers over my head and waited for the sound to come again. But all I heard was breathing. Not mine, not close, not just outside the wall, heavy and patient like something waiting. The next morning, there were no tracks in the dirt, but the chain on the root cellar had been moved. Not broken, just shifted, as if someone had pulled it and changed their mind. I didn't sleep well after that. I don't think I ever have. As the years passed, I tried to convince myself it had been my imagination, a trick of the light, a dream I mistook for memory. But the feeling never left. That sense of being watched, especially at night, especially near the barn. By the time I was 16, I had learned not to speak of it. Mom had grown quieter too, her face lined with something deeper than age. Then came the night of the storm. Lightning cracked the sky open, and rain came down in thick sheets loud enough to shake the windows. Around midnight, the power cut out. I lit an old lantern and walked through the house, checking windows, trying not to let the creaks of the floorboards get to me. That's when I saw it. Outside, standing just beyond the dying beam of the porch light, was the figure. Same height, same stillness. Only now it was closer than ever. Its head was tilted slightly to the side, like it was studying the house, or me. I couldn't see its face. There was only darkness where features should be. And then, as I stood frozen, the chain on the root cellar snapped, loud and sharp like a scream. I ran to my mother's room, but she was already sitting up, eyes wide, whispering, "He's not supposed to come above ground anymore. Not since the pact was broken." I stared at her, heart pounding, unsure if I had heard her right. The pact, she looked at me like she had finally run out of excuses. "It started with your great-grandfather," she said. "During the drought. He went into that cellar one night and came out different. He said he made a trade. Protection for the land, a shadow for a harvest." Her voice shook. And for a while it worked. Crops grew. The cattle thrived. But someone always had to watch the door. Keep it sealed. Keep it fed. I didn't understand. Not fully. But outside, the rain stopped. Silence felt too complete to be natural. Then we heard it. Heavy steps on the porch. Not fast, not urgent. Just inevitable. The doorknob turned once. Then again. And then it stopped. A voice followed, low, dry like leaves blowing across wood. The door was opened. The blood remembers. My mother stood, walked to the fireplace, and pulled a rusted iron key from a hidden panel. She placed it in my hand without a word. "It'll choose you now," she whispered. "It always chooses the youngest when the seal breaks." I shook my head, backing away, but she didn't move. Outside, something pressed against the window pane, a shape formless and tall. In the glass, it didn't have a face. It had mine, my reflection smiling back at me from inside the shadow. And suddenly, I understood. I hadn't been followed. I had been watched, prepared, all along. We never spoke of that night again. The next morning, the chain was back on the root cellar, fastened tightly, like it had never been touched. But I knew it had. I could still feel the weight of that key in my hand, even after I gave it back to my mother. For weeks I stayed inside after dark, avoiding mirrors, avoiding my own reflection. I stopped dreaming, or maybe I stopped remembering what I saw when I closed my eyes. My mother aged quickly after that. Her hands trembled, and sometimes she would stare out at the barn for hours without saying a word. One morning she was just gone. Her car in the driveway, her purse on the table. No footprints, no signs of struggle. Just an open door and silence stretching into the fields. I searched the cellar once. I don't remember walking down the steps. I only remember the dark, the thick velvet dark that seemed to breathe. I didn't find her, but something there knew my name, whispered it softly like a lullaby. And I think I answered. Some shadows don't chase you. They wait. They grow up with you. And when the time comes, they don't have to take you by force. They just open the door and let you remember that you were never running. You were returning to what was already yours. Story 5, The Lights in the Valley. The lights went out one by one, like something was swallowing the valley whole. We had been driving through a narrow mountain pass in Montana, just me and my dad, following the old state road that cut between frozen pine forests and steep cliffs. The stars were bright overhead, and the snow reflected just enough light to make the world feel dreamlike. Then the lights ahead began to vanish. First, the ones on the roadsides, then the headlights of a car we had seen in the distance. Gone. Darkness rolled in behind us too, swallowing everything in silence. The radio went to static. The dashboard died. The engine cut without warning. And there we were, alone on the road. No sound, no light, no movement. Just the quiet hum of something we couldn't hear yet. My dad whispered, "Do not open the door." That's when I realized he had seen this before. And he had never planned to tell me. My dad had always been the kind of man who believed in silence over stories. A former forest ranger turned mechanic. He didn't say much unless he had to. That winter, he invited me on a week-long trip through the northern Rockies. Just the two of us, a father-son thing before I left for college. We had packed light sleeping bags, canned food, and his beat-up Ford Bronco that he trusted more than any person alive. He said he wanted to show me the places he used to patrol the hidden valleys and roads nobody marked on modern maps. The kind of places that don't forget you if you stay too long. It was the fourth night of the trip when it happened. We had just passed an old ranger station long abandoned and were following the narrow stretch of Route 83 through a steep valley. Snow drifted down lightly and the sky was clear. I remember feeling calm, even grateful for the quiet. Dad had just switched off the radio when the lights ahead flickered and died. One by one, like candles being pinched out by invisible fingers. When our engine followed and the heater gave its final sigh, I turned to him for answers. He didn't look at me. He just stared out the windshield and said again quietly, "Don't open the door. No matter what you see, no matter what you hear." The silence that followed was the kind that makes your ears ring like the world had gone underwater. I could see my breath fogging the windshield, feel the cold slipping in now that the heater had died. Then I noticed something strange. The snow had stopped falling, but not naturally. It was like someone had hit pause on the sky. The flakes hung suspended in the air, outside the windshield, barely moving. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was just a trick of the headlights, but the lights were already out. There was no wind, no sound, just absolute stillness. Then I heard a hum, low and steady, almost beneath the range of hearing. It vibrated in my teeth more than my ears. Dad's knuckles tightened on the steering wheel. His eyes didn't blink. "It's starting," he said almost to himself. I leaned forward, looking out the front window, and saw faint glows moving through the trees ahead. Not flashlights, not vehicles. Spheres of pale green light drifting like they were being carried by something invisible. One of them passed over the road about 100 feet ahead and vanished. And then just outside my door, I heard it. A knock. Slow, hollow, like someone gently tapping the glass with a single finger. I didn't look. I couldn't. My hand hovered near the door handle without meaning to, as if something was pulling me toward it. Dad reached over without looking and grabbed my wrist. His grip was firm, colder than I expected. "Don't answer," he whispered. "It doesn't knock for you. Not yet." I stared at him, heart racing, unsure whether to ask questions or stay silent. That's when we saw them shapes moving through the tree line just beyond the reach of the snow-covered road. Not people exactly, more like outlines, tall and fluid, gliding between the trees without disturbing a single branch. And around each one, those pale lights drifted like insects drawn to their presence. One of them stopped, turned, faced us. Even from that distance, I knew it had no face, just smooth dark where eyes should be, where a mouth might have been. But I could feel it watching. The knocking came again, this time from the rear window, then again from the other side, a slow rhythm surrounding the Bronco. I squeezed my eyes shut. Dad leaned back in his seat, breathing slow and steady. "They want to be let in," he said. "They always do." I wanted to scream, to move, to do anything, but I couldn't. My body felt like stone. And outside, the lights were getting closer, floating, reaching, waiting for one of us to forget or to give in. Then the radio came back to life, not with music or static, but with a voice, a woman's voice, calm, familiar. She said my name slowly, like she was tasting it. Then again, and again. My father's eyes snapped open and locked on the dashboard. "Turn it off," he said. But I couldn't move. My name kept repeating. Then the voice changed. It was my mother's voice. She had passed away 3 years earlier, but now she was calling to me gently, like she used to when I had night terrors as a kid. "It's cold out here," she whispered through the speakers. "Come help me." I reached toward the door. Dad shouted, grabbed my jacket, pulled me back. The Bronco shook, hard. Something was moving across the roof, slow and deliberate. The knocking returned, now tapping every window in unison, like fingers drumming in time with my heartbeat. Then the lights outside flared brilliant green and white, flooding the cab. I covered my face. For a second, I felt weightless, like the truck had lifted off the ground. Then darkness slammed down like a wave, and everything stopped. No sound, no light, just the hum dying into silence. When I opened my eyes, the road was empty. The engine roared back to life. The radio was off. My dad was staring at the sky. "You almost let them in," he said. "They don't knock for me anymore. Just for you now." And in the rearview mirror, I saw one pale green light still flickering in the valley behind us. Following. We didn't speak the rest of the drive. My dad kept his eyes on the road, hands white-knuckled on the wheel, refusing to look in the mirrors. I sat in silence, feeling the warmth return to the truck, but the cold inside me never left. That night, we slept at a roadside motel near Helena. He didn't lock the door, just sat in the chair by the window until morning, staring out like he was waiting for something. When I asked him what they were, he said, "Only this. Not everything in the dark wants to hurt you. Some things just want to be remembered. But remembering is enough to bring them back. I've tried to forget, but I can't. Sometimes when I'm alone in a car at night, the dashboard flickers, the snow stops falling, and the radio hums to life with no signal. I change the station, turn it off, but every now and then through the static, I hear her voice, my mother's voice, calling my name from somewhere deep and far. And the lights in the distance begin to move. Maybe the valley doesn't keep you. Maybe it just marks you, leaves a piece of itself inside you, quiet and waiting. And maybe one day when the lights return, I won't be in the truck watching them. I'll be standing among them, and I'll be the one who knocks. Story 6. The Red Horseman of the Battlefield. My grandfather never spoke of the war until the year he died. Even then, it wasn't a story he meant to tell. It slipped out late one night as he sat on the porch staring into a thunderstorm that hadn't yet reached our land. He said there was something he saw in the jungle during his time as a foreign contractor in Colombia, something that didn't belong to this world or the next. A rider with no reins, no face, and a body fused with a horse the color of dried blood. It moved without sound, only appearing after the worst fighting when the air was thick with gunpowder and death. He said the creature never touched the living, only walked among the fallen. But those who looked it in the eye never came back the same. Then he looked at me, eyes hollow, and whispered, "I saw it twice. The first time I survived. The second time I buried my whole unit. And I never slept in peace again." My grandfather, Alejandro Medina, was not a soldier in the traditional sense. After leaving the army in his 30s, he worked as a private security contractor across South America during the 1980s, mostly in Colombia, during the height of cartel violence and rural insurgencies. He never bragged about what he did. Most of the time, he just said he was paid to protect shipments and keep people from doing stupid things in dangerous places. He was tall, quiet, and always seemed like he was listening to something just outside the room. As a kid, I idolized him. The worn boots by the door, the machete he sharpened every Sunday, and the way he never flinched at thunder or raised his voice when angry. But there were things he never explained, like why he wouldn't sleep near windows, or why he lit a candle every year on the same day in August and left it burning through the night without saying a word. That summer, just weeks before he passed, we were visiting his ranch in the Highlands. He had started to forget things, calling me by my father's name, mistaking the year. But when the storm rolled in and the power went out, something shifted in him. He looked out into the darkness, and for the first time in my life, he began to tell me the story that no one else in the family had ever heard. He said it happened in the summer of 1985, deep in the jungle near the Magdalena River, during a week-long escort mission that had gone sideways. His team had taken fire near an abandoned village and were forced to dig in, waiting for extraction that kept getting delayed. The days were wet and hot. The nights were worse thick with mosquitoes and something else he couldn't name. The first strange thing was the silence. Not the kind you get when people are scared, but something deeper. The jungle stopped singing. No frogs, no birds. Just a stillness that wrapped around the trees and pressed against the skin like a second colder sweat. Then the smell came. It wasn't rot, not exactly. More like rust and burned soil. One of the younger men in the squad started vomiting for no reason, saying the air felt wrong, like it was too close to the ground. They posted guards in shifts, but someone kept waking up with dirt on their boots, even though they hadn't moved. Alejandro said he began to feel like something was walking through their camp at night. Not around it, through it. But no one ever saw anything. Not yet. Just the signs, the stillness, the scent, the dreams of hooves hitting mud, and red light flickering behind closed eyes. On the fourth night, things began to unravel. The extraction was delayed again, and tempers were fraying. One of the men, Delgado, wandered off during his shift and came back at dawn barefoot and shaking his boots, still tied neatly beside his cot. He wouldn't say where he went, only that he had followed something glowing between the trees. That same morning, the birds returned, but they weren't singing. They were shrieking. Dozens of them circling the canopy above the camp, crying out, until one by one they fell from the branches, dead before they hit the ground. Alejandro said that's when the men started whispering about old stories, the kind they only spoke of after dark. Tales of a spirit that walked battlefields after the blood had dried. Not to claim the dead, but to remember them, to count. The camp smelled stronger now, a mix of iron and wet smoke, even though nothing was burning. On the fifth night, the dreams came. Alejandro saw fire licking the treetops, bodies sprawled in the mud, and a rider slowly crossing the field fused to the back of a red horse with no face of its own. The rider had no arms, no voice, only a head that turned slowly toward him in the dream. And when he woke, someone in the camp had gone missing. No sound, no struggle, just gone. Only a single hoofprint in the wet earth remained, and it was facing the wrong direction. By the sixth day, panic had set in. Radios stopped working. Compass needles spun without settling. Alejandro said even the shadows under the trees felt wrong, stretching in directions the sun didn't support. That night, as they huddled in the remains of the village church, something changed. The air grew warm, dense, and heavy with silence. No wind, no breath. Then hooves, slow, deliberate, echoing across soil that had no stones. The squad froze. Alejandro peeked through a shattered window. What he saw never left him. The creature emerged from the trees without sound. The horse, if you could still call it that, was the color of clotted blood ribs, like spear's legs too long to be natural. Fused to its back as if melted into flesh was the upper body of a man. No arms. Just a torso wide and unmoving. Its head tilted unnaturally forward, and its face, or what replaced it, was a smooth surface that reflected red light like glass. No eyes, no mouth. But somehow it saw them. It passed among the corpses of the last firefight, as if counting. And then it stopped, turned, faced the church. That's when one of the younger men, terrified beyond reason, opened fire. The bullets passed through the figure like smoke. And then every candle in the church, even unlit ones, flared to life. Red flame, no heat, just light. And a voice in Alejandro's head, not spoken, just felt. One word. Remember. The next morning, only Alejandro remained. The rest were never found. No blood, no signs of struggle. Just a hoofprint burned into the church floor. Facing him. My grandfather never returned to Colombia after that. He left the contract world within a year, bought the quiet ranch in the hills, and lived the rest of his life as if something was waiting just beyond the tree line. He never told anyone the full story until that night on the porch. But the signs had always been there. The nightmares that left him shouting in Spanish. The way he flinched at distant thunder or avoided funerals. He said the Red Horseman didn't kill with violence. It killed with memory. By making you relive every scream, every mistake, every face you couldn't say. He said it was a witness, more than a monster. a being tied to places soaked in blood and silence. When I asked him why it let him live, he looked at me and said, "Maybe because I saw it before it saw me. Or maybe because it knew I would carry the story." And in the quiet that followed, I realized he wasn't telling me to forget. He was making sure it would not be forgotten. Some things don't haunt the battlefield. They become it. They live in the silence after the last shot and the name's never spoken again. And maybe the Red Horseman doesn't come for vengeance or judgment. Maybe it comes so we'll never pretend we were alone. Story 7. The Storm Woman. The first time I saw her, the air was thick with lightning and the lake smelled like copper. I was 12, crouched beneath a wooden dock at my uncle's cabin, hiding from a storm that had rolled in too fast to be natural. The wind didn't howl, it hissed. The kind of wind that feels like it's whispering right into your ear, even when you're alone. And then she appeared, standing out on the water. Not in a boat, on the water. A woman in a white dress that clung to her like mist hair trailing behind her like smoke in reverse. She didn't move, just watched. The lake went still around her. No rain dared touch her. And then just as fast as she came, she vanished in a flash that split the sky but made no sound. I ran home soaking and shaking, told no one. But years later, I found out my uncle had seen her too. And he said she always comes before someone drowns. My uncle's cabin sat on the edge of Lost Birch Lake, a place so remote that cell signals died 20 miles before you reached the dirt road. It had no neighbors, just pine trees thick enough to swallow sunlight and water, so dark it looked black even at noon. The cabin was old, built by my grandfather in the 1940s, and passed down like a burden none of us wanted but never refused. My Uncle Hank was a man of silence. Widowed early, no children, a Vietnam vet, with eyes that always seemed to be scanning the horizon for something no one else could see. He didn't talk about the war. He didn't talk much at all. But every summer, he invited me to stay a week with him at the cabin, just the two of us. It was always the same week, late August, when the storms came without warning. He'd stock up on food oil, the hinges test the generator, and keep a lantern burning through the night. I thought it was just habit until that year I saw her. After that, I noticed things I hadn't before. The way he watched the lake when it got too still. How he refused to fish after sunset. And the journal he kept locked in a drawer, one I'd only opened years later, long after he was gone. The first strange thing that happened that week wasn't the storm. It was the air. Still. Heavy. Too quiet for summer. The frogs stopped croaking, even the mosquitoes seemed to vanish. On the third night, just after dinner, I noticed the wind had changed direction without a single leaf moving. My uncle stepped outside with his coffee and stood frozen for a full minute, just staring at the lake. Then he told me plainly we wouldn't be fishing the next morning. When I asked why, he said the lake needed a rest. That night, the rain never came, but the sky flashed like it was at war with itself. And just before I drifted off, I heard a voice. Faint, feminine, not outside, but in my head like a thought that didn't belong to me. She's close. I sat up, heart pounding. The window was fogged, but I swear I saw the outline of a figure near the shore, standing ankle deep in water facing the house. When I blinked, she was gone. I tried waking Uncle Hank, but he was already sitting up staring at the door, whispering under his breath, a name I didn't recognize. Later I'd find it again, scribbled over and over in the margins of his old journal. Elena. The next day the lake looked normal, almost too normal. The sky was cloudless, but the humidity clung to everything like wet cloth. My uncle didn't say much. He spent most of the day sharpening his old fishing knife, even though we weren't planning to fish. That evening, I went down to the dock by myself, drawn by a kind of restlessness I couldn't explain. The water was calm, perfectly flat. But I noticed something strange floating near the shoreline, a bouquet of lilies, fresh and bound with twine. I reached for them with a branch, but the moment I touched them, the wind shifted. Fast, violent, cold. I stumbled backward as the water began to ripple outward from the center of the lake, as if something beneath had stirred. Uncle Hank shouted my name from the cabin, his voice sharp and panicked, something I'd never heard from him before. I looked up just in time to see her again, farther out this time, standing waist deep in the lake, her white dress trailing like fog around her. Her head tilted slowly toward me, and though her face was obscured by strands of dripping black hair, I felt her eyes settle on mine. I froze, not in fear, but in something colder, recognition. Uncle Hank pulled me back, just as the ripples reached the shore. He didn't say a word. He just locked the doors and began lighting every lantern in the house. That night, the storm finally came. But it wasn't like any storm I'd seen before. There was no thunder, no lightning, just a low humming pressure that made the cabin walls pulse like a heartbeat. The lamps flickered, casting long shadows that didn't always match our movements. My uncle sat in the middle of the room, shotgun across his lap, eyes locked on the front door. He told me not to speak, not even to breathe loud. I tried asking who Elena was, but he shook his head, eyes shining. He said she was his reason for coming here every August. Said he used to love her. Said he left her, drowned her. And she waited every year for him. And now that he was too old to go down to the lake, she would come to him. Then came the knock. Soft, delicate, not on the door, on the window behind him. My breath caught. Slowly I turned, and there she was, inches from the glass. Her face was beautiful, but waterlogged, skin too pale, lips tinged blue, eyes cloudy and wide, fixed on Hank. She mouthed something I couldn't hear. Then she smiled. Not cruel, not angry, just empty. My uncle stood, walked to the door like a man under a spell. I screamed for him to stop. He opened it, and for a moment, the cabin filled with lake water and wind that smelled like lilies and rot. I reached for him, but it was too late. He stepped outside. The door slammed shut behind him, and the storm vanished. Just like that. When I opened the door, the lake was calm again. Uncle Hank was gone. Only wet footprints remained, leading to the dock and ending at its edge. I stayed in the cabin until morning too, afraid to sleep, too shaken to leave. When the sun rose, it felt wrong, pale and distant, like light passing through water. I walked down to the dock alone. The lilies were gone. So was the breeze. Everything felt still, like the lake was holding its breath. I called out his name. Nothing. No birds. No frogs. Just the faint creak of the wooden planks beneath my feet. When I looked into the water, I didn't see my reflection. I saw her, Elena, staring up from below, her face inches beneath the surface, eyes open, and next to her, Uncle Hank drifting beside her like he belonged there. Then they vanished, as if the lake had blinked. I backed away, heart pounding, unsure if what I saw was real. I left the cabin that day and never returned. But sometimes when storms gather and the wind shifts without warning, I hear her voice again, soft, inside my head. And I know she's still waiting. Maybe not for him anymore. Maybe for me. Some storms are born from weather. Others are born from memory and regret. She wasn't a ghost. She was grief given shape. And once she chooses your name, the lake remembers. The wind listens. And no matter how far you run, the storm will always find you. Story 8, The Girl in the Trees. When I was 8, I saw a girl in the trees behind our cabin. Pale skin, white dress, long black hair that didn't move even when the wind did. She was standing between 2 pine trunks at the edge of the forest, like she was stitched into the shadows. I thought she was just another kid from the nearby campground until I noticed her eyes. They were all black, not dark, black. No whites, no pupils. Just 2 hollow voids staring right at me. I blinked and she was gone. My parents said I was imagining things that kids see weird stuff all the time in the woods. But I never forgot her. Years passed. I moved away, grew up, tried to let it go. But now, 30 years later, after coming back to clean out my late father's cabin, she's here again. Same spot, same dress, same black eyes. And this time, she smiled. The cabin had not changed much since I was a child. It sat tucked into a thicket of pines at the far edge of Stone Lake Forest, a 2-hour drive from the nearest town, and surrounded on 3 sides by trees so dense they looked like walls. My father built it in the 70s, back when he was trying to escape the noise of city life. He succeeded a little too well. After my mom died, he spent more and more time up here, eventually moving in full time. I only visited once in a while after college. The place gave me a quiet kind of unease I could never quite name. But when he passed, I was the only one left to clear it out. I arrived in early fall just before the snow started to threaten the roads. The forest was silent in that eerie way you forget exists until you're alone in it. No birdsong, no crunch of wildlife in the brush. Just the steady creak of trees swaying in a wind that seemed to circle but never touch you. I brought boxes and tools and a mind full of old memories. I didn't plan to stay long. A weekend, maybe 2. But the second night, while sorting through a crate of my dad's journals, I looked out the kitchen window, and there she was again. The girl in the trees, watching, smiling, waiting, like she'd never left. Or maybe like she'd been waiting all along. I stared through the window for what felt like minutes, heart thudding as that pale face peered from the tree line. Then, without moving a muscle, she simply wasn't there anymore. No blink, no shift, just gone. I tried to shake it off, blaming old memories or exhaustion. But that night, the strangeness deepened. Around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by a sharp tapping sound. It was rhythmic, like someone gently knocking, not on the front door. On the window above my bed. The cabin has no second story. That window is over 10 feet off the ground. When I finally gathered the nerve to peek outside, there was nothing but trees and the reflection of my own wide-eyed face. I tried going back to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I heard leaves rustling without wind. Faint laughter, a child's whisper, words I couldn't understand. The next morning, I found small handprints on the fogged glass. Too small to be mine, too fresh to be from 30 years ago. I wiped them away, but they came back again that evening. Same size, same shape. I started to wonder if coming back had stirred something I had no business disturbing. Something that never stopped watching from between the trees. By the 4th night, I stopped pretending I was imagining things. The girl was real. Or at least something pretending to be a girl. She never came closer than the tree line, but every time I looked out a window, she was there. Same white dress, same black eyes, and always that slow, knowing smile. I stopped opening the curtains altogether. I kept the lights on. I even dragged an old hunting rifle from the attic, though I wasn't sure what good it would do. That evening, the temperature dropped suddenly. and with it came a silence so complete it felt unnatural. Not even the trees moved. I lit the fireplace, trying to drown out the quiet with the crackle of wood. But then the power cut out. Not a flicker. Just dead. I grabbed my flashlight, and the moment I turned it on, I saw her again this time, reflected in the window behind me, standing just beyond the porch. My heart nearly stopped. I turned ready to confront whatever this thing was, but the porch was empty. No footprints in the frost. Nothing but the soft creaking of trees. I locked every door and window, dragged furniture against the entrance, and sat with the rifle across my lap, waiting. But the strangest thing of all, I wasn't scared the way I thought I'd be. I was starting to feel something else. Like maybe I knew her, or she knew me, like I was expected. That night I fell asleep in the chair by the fire, rifle still in my hands. I dreamed of trees. Endless trees. And somewhere between them, a girl's laughter echoing like wind through dead branches. I woke to find the fire cold and the cabin door wide open. Frost crept across the floorboards, and in the center of the living room, a line of small wet footprints led from the entrance to the hallway. I followed them, heart pounding, until they stopped right outside my childhood bedroom. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, the air was freezing, and sitting cross-legged in the middle of the floor was the girl, head tilted, eyes black as a moonless sky. She didn't move when I entered. She just watched me, smiling, that same smile I remembered from decades ago. But now it wasn't just eerie. It was familiar. She lifted one hand and pointed to the wall. There, etched into the old wood paneling, were dozens of small marks, dates, all the same day, all spaced exactly 1 year apart. The last one tomorrow. I stepped back, trying to understand. That's when the whispers started again, loud this time, filling the room with words I still couldn't grasp. The girl stood slowly, and for a moment her features flickered, not childlike, but older. Sharper. My mother's cheekbones, my father's eyes, my own jawline. She opened her mouth wider than humanly possible, and from it came a shriek so piercing, I dropped the rifle. My vision blurred. I stumbled backward out of the room and slammed the door shut behind me. The whispers stopped. The house fell silent, but the door remained ice cold to the touch. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in the corner of the living room, lights on fire, relit door barricaded again. But I kept glancing at the hallway, half expecting her to return. She didn't. Morning came cold and silent. I packed my things quickly, barely looking at the bedroom door as I passed. But just before I left, I noticed something carved into the inside of the front door. A name. Mine. Etched deep. Underneath it, the word next. I don't remember carving it. I don't remember ever seeing it before. But the handwriting was mine. The grooves were fresh. I drove until I saw other people, until the woods became fields and the air felt breathable again. But I never went back. I sold the cabin the next month cheap. Told myself I imagined it all. But even now, sometimes I see her, reflected in car windows, in the mirror when I'm too tired to focus, always smiling, always watching, as if she's still counting down to something only she understands. Maybe that's why my father stayed up there so long. Maybe he wasn't escaping the world. Maybe he was holding something back. And now, it's waiting for me. Some things we outgrow. Others wait until we return. She wasn't a memory. She was a legacy, passed down like blood or a debt. And when the trees whisper your name again, you'll understand. You were never just a visitor. You were always part of her story. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't keep the fear to yourself. Leave a comment, smash that like button, and share this video with someone who dares to listen in the dark. We release terrifying true stories every week, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's lurking in the shadows. This is High Scare Stories, where nightmares don't end when the video does. Until next time, stay safe and stay scared.